Welcome back to our Universal Canon series, in which we're concentrating on certain seminal Jewish works, which are part, of course, of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, having already introduced you to the incredible works of Ibn Battuta, that is, in particular, just one work, actually, The Duties of the Heart, we will now turn to another medieval Jewish great, a poet, but a poet who was at once so great that his verse has made its way into not only our liturgy as Torah observant Orthodox Jews, but into our very heart and soul, because we are face to face once a year with the writings of the poet that I'm about to discuss, Moshe Ibn Ezra, or Moses Ibn Ezra. What do I mean? It's not just any Jewish poet or writer whose works wend or make their way into those very prayers which we recite on the holiest of holy days, Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. We actually are first greeted by some of his hymns the night before, the night of Kol Nidre. Of course, the Jewish New Year already having passed. The reason I'm weaving this in is that Ibn Ezra is a likely candidate to follow Battuta, because Ibn Ezra was also trained in the best of rabbinic academies, in this case Spain, and not only as a poet, but as an erudite scholar in his own right, who had mastered many different fields, would turn his attention to the greater questions of what it is to be human, and in particular, how one stands in relationship with the God of the universe. Now, I'm going to be reading, not from my own notes, but from the work of another, of Chaim Haydn, the editor-in-chief of the Thesaurus of Book Titles, which, by the way, was a book given to me by my mother more than 30 years ago, before I took off to university, and would find that thanks to that book, which served as a foundation to all the other books that would come after, I was able to choose my calling in life: literature, history, and philosophy. So I will read verbatim from the entry, Ibn Ezra Moses, as it appears in the Thesaurus of Book Digests. Ibn Ezra Moses, who lived from 1070 to 1138, he was born in Granada, which of course is Spain, and not heard of after 1138, Moses Yaqub ibn Ezra was a member of a distinguished family of scholars and poets, a phenomenon we often encounter in the lives of Jewish greats, such as the genius of the great Gaon, the great Lithuanian rabbi. He too was a child prodigy. We know that Ibn Ezra Moses was a rabbinic scholar, philosopher, and linguist, studying assiduously despite a life of ease and luxury. Now, interspersed with my readings from Chaim Haydn, I'll make my own observations, which I'm doing now. Christians can relate to this idea of a great scholar having come from the smoldering embers of a passionate life given to the passions. For instance, St. Francis of Assisi comes to mind. Born into great wealth an aristocrat belonging to one of the greatest and most powerful Italian families. St. Francis of Assisi had started out as a rake, as a man of the world, if you will. But he got burned up, so he turned his life to God. And that's pretty much what even Ezra Moses did, according to this. He had an interesting start. He went through the motions. Belonging to a rabbinic family, he made sure that he excelled well in places such as yeshiva and kollel. Once again, we know that he was a rabbinic scholar, philosopher, and linguist, studying assiduously despite a life of ease and luxury. The disillusionment and bitterness that marked so many of his stanzas, and his predilection for composing penitential prayers, are generally ascribed to an unrequited love for his niece, but may more probably be due to personal misfortunes following a political overturn in his home city. Little is known of his life beyond his works. These include a book on God, nature, and the intellect, entitled Bed of Fragrance, a treatise on rhetoric and poetry, secular poetry, the Book of Discussion and Remembrance, Tarshish, largely secular poetry, and the Diwan, secular poems with many encomia and elegies and penitential poems. Don't let words like encomia frighten you. An encomium is a work that heaps lavish praise on an individual for some accomplishment or another. The last, that is, the penitential poems and elegies, are to be found throughout the Jewish liturgy for the New Year Atonement period, which we've already discussed. Moses Ibn Ezra, though recognizing that poesy must be inspired, laid stress on the art of poetry. He accepted the Arab laws of poetics as conformable to the spirit of the Hebrew language. In other words, back in those days, they wrote everything in Arabic. And Arabic, then as now, but more so then, the classical Arabic style, would employ something known as verse. Even if they wrote a book on astronomy or grammar, it was still written in a form of verse. Ibn Ezra provided biographical and critical data concerning previous Hebrew poets of Spain, and wrote extensively on the rules of verse structure. Frequently philosophical, his poems are marked by fine imagery, grace, and power. He had remarkable skill in interpolating scriptural verses within his own compositions. To interpolate something means to, put it between the lines. It means to add something to something. Part of Ibn Ezra's distinction lies in the fact that he was among the earliest Jewish poets to extend his prosodizing to worldly matters, such as physical pleasures, wine, love, and riddles. Now, what is that high-dollar word, prosodizing? Well, you just take the word prosody, and you're making it into a verb. And what is prosody? It's basically the opposite of poetry. Anything prosaic is unpoetic. Prosody can be a form of poetry, but it's not that type of poetry to which we are accustomed. So here ends this little lesson on a great luminary, Ibn Ezra Moses, whose works have reverberated to the ages, whose works greet us on every Yom Kippur.